International Podcast Day is September 30th, and here's how to start the conversation and celebrate podcasting. Welcome to the Audacity to Podcast, episode 234. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and this is the award-winning how-to podcast about podcasting. It's where I give you the guts and teach you the tools to launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. September is a big month for podcasters. There's a lot of history behind podcasting that occurs in September, and that's why, part of the reason why, on September 30th is International Podcast Day. So I am thrilled to have Steve Lee, the head guy behind International Podcast Day, with me for this episode. And we'll be talking about what is International Podcast Day, what you as a podcaster can do to celebrate International Podcast Day, what podcast enthusiasts can do, and what this new award is that's available and some cool prizes available with that, and some of the activities that will be going on around the live event on September 30th. So please join us for International Podcast Day. Yes, there will be show notes with this episode at theaudacitytopodcast.com/234. But everything we're going to be talking about and much more is over at internationalpodcastday.com. So if there's no other URL you remember from this special episode, then please go over to internationalpodcastday.com. Steve, thank you very much for joining me.
Daniel, it's so great to be on this show especially. It's one of my favorites, as you know, and we have a lot of great things coming up later this month.
So tell me, I mean, I know because I'm one of the founders with you, but let's talk about what is International Podcast Day?
You know, in the very bottom line of what this movement is, or whatever you want to call it, this celebration day, it's really one day each year that we can all come together and celebrate our craft and our art with the world. I found that, you know, in years past, a lot of times we just go through our routine, developing our podcast, getting them produced, working on listenership. But how do we come together as an entire group and celebrate what we're doing? And I think most importantly is not just from a podcaster perspective, but certainly from a listener perspective, how do we get out and reach and touch them? So really, Podcast Day is your day. Make it what you want it to be.
I love that. It's even better than Burger King's slogan. But we've seen that podcasters have tried to start this conversation with people through all kinds of different means. But what I see as great about International Podcast Day is now we have a designated day, even proclaimed there in the state of California, as a day to celebrate podcasts and podcasting. And so now we can all focus our efforts, and now it can get a lot more attention because, like, I've contacted my local news agencies and talked about, hey, there's this day coming up about podcasting. Would you be interested in doing a story about podcasting or International Podcast Day, either to mention that day before it happens or to publish something on that day? Would you like to participate in this conversation? So this now gives us that day to accomplish these things as a broader community. Where'd you get the idea for International Podcast Day?
It's really kind of interesting, Daniel. In 2013, I was actually driving to Los Angeles in my vehicle. And for whatever reason, and I don't know why, I wasn't listening to podcasts. I was listening to the radio. And I heard this commercial come on the radio. And they were talking about a National Senior Citizens Day. Well, since I fall into that group, it kind of made sense for me to listen to the promo, and I did. So as I got farther into my destination, I was thinking, why is there not a day for us to celebrate podcasting? So in 2014, I contacted you and a few other individuals and threw out this idea about National Podcast Day. Let's have a day to celebrate. So we collectively threw around some ideas, and last September, we had the first National Podcast Day, which was really a great event. And I don't know if a lot of people remember this. We trended #1 on Twitter for 16 straight hours.
Hashtag Podcast Day.
Yeah, and remember that. It's a great hashtag to follow. And With that entire event, there was a lot of lessons learned, a lot of things that we could have done better. So we also heard a lot of feedback that a lot of people in different countries really felt that they were being excluded because it was called National Podcast Day. And truly, that was not the intent. National meant anybody. Everybody's a national of something. So we discussed it and we decided to rebrand to International Podcast Day. And I'll tell you, the word is already picking up. People are already starting to create events and the word is going again. So here we go.
Yeah, by calling it international, it really does bring in this larger global community of podcasters instead of saying like, okay, this country has their own podcast day and they're celebrating by themselves. We're celebrating all together, and we'll have that done in a really cool way. And we'll get to that more in a moment. But what are some ways that we as podcasters can really leverage this day and celebrate International Podcast Day? Or what can we do leading up to International Podcast Day?
I think there's quite a few things. And you mentioned the website. And if you go over there, we have many ideas listed there, potential suggestions of what you can do. But certainly one of the first things to do is go over the website. And since it's almost September, why not go ahead and get all the artwork and the promos that we have available over there? We have banner images that you can put on your website. We have images where you can change your social media icons. We have audio and video promos that you can put inside your shows to help get the word out, to help promote it. Now, aside from that, Daniel, there's a lot of things you can do. We're getting emails every day about people having their own local International Podcast Day celebrations. Whether it's a meetup with 3 people, whether it's a special live broadcast, whether it's a special episode, whether it's a blog post, people are really starting to get creative and coming up with their own ideas of what they want to do and how they want to promote it. And to me, that is the most important aspect of this entire thing, is not for us to tell you what to do, but you do what you think is important to engage in the podcasting world, then tell us about it and we will rebroadcast information that's applicable.
Yeah, there are so many things that you as a podcaster could do to celebrate this day. Like here, just off the top of my mind, here's some things you could do in addition to what Steve said. Maybe contact your local library and see if you could host a free class about podcasting. It could be either how to subscribe to a podcast or how to podcast. Because remember, this isn't only for podcasters. This is also for podcast enthusiasts and to turn the rest of the world into podcast enthusiasts. You could take this as a day to go out there and tell people about your podcast. Maybe you actually decide to go door to door in your neighborhood with little cards and maybe some cookies or something like that. And you tell people about podcasts and you show them how to subscribe to a podcast, or you ask them about their favorite topic and you help them find a podcast for them. There are also some fun things that you can do. And we've done some video shoots a little bit before that. I'm putting together a video thing for Stuff Podcasters Say, and it's going to be a funny little video that if you can, this first week of September, if you can get a video to me in high definition of you or someone talking about podcasting and some of the crazy stuff we say that out of context really sounds hilarious, please send me a recording of that. It just needs to have good audio. A good lighting would be good as well, but most importantly is good audio because we're podcasters. But send that to me. I'd love to put that together for this video that I'll be releasing in the middle of September of Stuff Podcasters Say. But you could also go out and tell someone randomly, just find someone on the street, maybe interview them and tell them about a podcast, or all kinds of things that you can do as a podcaster, or do special things for your community on this day. Steve, some of the things last year, I'd like to hear from you. I know some people launched their podcast on International Podcast Day. What were some of the other cool things the community of podcasters did to celebrate last year?
That was really cool. There were a lot of people that were really sitting on the fence about whether they should launch a podcast or not. And they decided to. And then they said to themselves, you know what? I'm going to release my first show on Podcast Day. And like you said, and that was just really, really cool. Some other people have live streamed their meetups, which was kind of interesting. Having a meetup. Periscope and that stuff wasn't around then, so they would do it via other methods. But just to show them having a discussion during a meetup and how much they were learning and laughing and having fun, because that's a part of it too. is having fun. Sometimes, we all get very serious with this stuff, but it's time to have a good laugh once in a while. And in case in point, you briefly mentioned it, I have a video on YouTube where last year I just arbitrarily walked into my water district here, and the guy came over to the counter asking, "Can I help you, sir?" And I had my camera running. He must have thought I was some kind of freak or something. But I asked him, "What is your favorite podcast?" And I got this, deer look, and it was like, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, once I got the response from him, when I was done, I sat down and I go, "Here's what it's all about. And by the way, here's my podcast app. Here, I'll put it on your phone for you. What are you interested in? Sports? Oh, we have a sports show. Oh, here, the Tech of Sports. Once you enjoyed listening to this show, he's hooked. I went and saw him a couple months ago. He's still listening to the shows, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great way. I think this year we are certainly going to find incredible creative people out there that are doing some real cool things. I just posted on social media, I think it was over the weekend, 2 podcasters in Poland, which created a video in Polish all about Podcast Day. Wow. And it is so cool. And matter of fact, I just sent them an email to see if they want to do be one of the live broadcasters out of Poland. So that'd be cool. So really, Daniel, there's a lot of things going on, and the important thing is be creative, and secondly, let us know so we can help promote those things for you.
Yeah, go to that website, internationalpodcastday.com, and there are all kinds of resources and information and ideas there, but don't feel limited to these ideas. Come up with your own ideas, what fits you and what you want to do to celebrate podcasting and grow the podcasting community out there. So that's for you as a podcaster, but also I think and I hope that all of us as podcasters are also podcast enthusiasts. We're listening to podcasts. I mean, you're listening to this podcast, and you probably have your own podcast too. But I think there's a lot to do for the podcast enthusiast as well. And even if you don't have a blog or a show about podcasting, you can still spread this message as a podcast enthusiast, getting other podcast enthusiasts to celebrate International Podcast Day. So, Steve, what are some ways that we as enthusiasts can give back to the podcasting community in order to celebrate International Podcast Day?
It's a very good question, because I think a lot of ways, certainly number one, if somebody doesn't know about the medium, we need to tell them about it. Because here, folks, we're going to kick radio's butt here real soon, and it's all about us, okay? So let's get the word out. Let's get them on board right now. Let's don't wait till that all happens. Personal opinion. However, when it comes to listeners, I think a lot of times if they know about the medium, they only have a very small tunnel avenue that they know how to get to various kinds of sources or podcasts per se. Over on the website, if you go internationalpodcastday.com/listener, we've also listed out things that, listeners can do to help celebrate too. And, by the way, we have also listed out podcast directories and apps and all those kinds of things for people to start consuming content more on a widespread platform instead of being very narrow in how they know how to consume this kind of content. And here's the other thing. If you have a great idea that we need to put in here on that website, an idea of how we can increase engagement and all this, let us know. We'd be happy to, lay it out here. But I think the real important part, and that's why our tagline, Daniel, is so strong, is start the conversation. That is the most important, critical aspect that we can do with the entire International Podcast Day.
There are many other ways I can see that we as podcast consumers can give back as well. Like maybe one thing is simply find another podcast you'll love. I think it's easy for us to get focused in on the podcast we listen to, or in this group of podcasts we're familiar with, where we hear one podcaster mention another podcast, so we then go check out that podcast. But I'd encourage you to go try to find a podcast you've heard no one talk about. Listen to it, check it out, send them some feedback. That's another great way I think you can give back to other podcasters, is send them feedback. Thank them for what they're doing. Send them a story, send them something they can use in their podcast. Audio would probably be great for them as well, or video, even if they're doing a video show. All kinds of ways you could give back. Don't wait until that day to give back to the podcast that you appreciate, but look for ways that you can give back on that day. I know one of the things last year I did was I tried to review as many podcasts that I listened to as I could on that day in order to give back to them and show my appreciation for the podcasts I consume. And that can be a great way that you can give back to others and encourage your own audience to give back to you, yes, as well as to other people. And we've got something special to mention about reviews in a moment. But reviews really do encourage podcasters, and it helps with certain measurements of momentum in iTunes and Stitcher and other platforms as well. So ask your audience, please write a review for this podcast, and please review your other favorite podcasts on this day, because every podcaster out there would love to see those written reviews. So it's a great way to celebrate International Podcast Day by expressing that gratefulness, by letting other people see what podcasts you consume. One of the things I did last year was on my personal blog, danieljlewis.net, I posted a list of all of the podcasts that I subscribe to. And some people commented on that saying, oh, wow, thank you. There are some podcasts here I would have never thought of, like completely out of the normal genre. Like there's a podcast about 90s and 80s computer games. And it's a great podcast, and it's one that I listen to when I can. And there were people on that list who contacted me saying, wow, I had no idea you listened to my podcast. Thank you very much. So look for ways you can give to other podcasters on that day. It's not about competition. It's really about community. And that's what this is. Start the conversation, even with who you might consider your competition.
I just say that's so important that that we all do give back. And because, and you touched on this, but I think we can all remember perhaps that first comment or review we got and how that just pumped us up. And it's important that we continually have that motivational factor. And, I myself, I try my best, but I think it's so simple, Daniel, just to say thank you. Whatever format, whatever form, just say thank you. That's all you got to do.
Yeah. And to help you with that and inspire you, we are also happy to announce the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award. This will be a single award that we'll be giving out to a podcast that has really made the most impact on its audience. And you have the chance for your podcast to win this award. And you have just as much of a chance for a small podcast as for a big podcast. And I'm honored to be running this awards, and it's sponsored by mypodcastreviews.com, because here's the way that we're going to measure this is to ask you submit your own show. So you nominate your show saying, yes, I want my show to be considered for this award. It doesn't cost you anything, no membership required for anything like that. But you just say, I want to be in this award. I want to try to get the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award. Then what you do is you ask your audience for iTunes ratings or Stitcher ratings, and that will be how they vote for you. Not by regularly updating their reviews or something like that, but by writing a new review or updating their review for you in iTunes or Stitcher. And this can be a way then that you can ask them in this review that you ask them to write, especially ask them to include what the podcast has done for them. Why are they thankful for the podcast? What impact has the podcast made on their lives? There might be something just silly like, oh, it really helps me to laugh each day. I really enjoy the stories. Or it could be something serious, like you'll maybe discover from one of the people who write a review for you that they were in a really dark, low place in their life, and your podcast gave them hope. All kinds of things like that you would have no idea those stories ever existed unless people sent you those stories. So a great way to do that is ask them to write a review for you in iTunes or Stitcher. So when you've submitted your podcast for the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award, we'll look at your podcast and then we'll track the reviews for you. We'll be looking with the tool that I've created, mypodcastreviews.com, and we'll look at your reviews, and we have a certain algorithm that will give just as much weight and opportunity to the small podcasts as to the big podcasts. So this is not a numbers game. This is about impact. How much can you impact the audience you have, and how grateful are they for the impact that you're making? Ask them to write a review for you. So don't ask them just yet. Make sure that you go over to internationalpodcastday.com and submit your podcast to be part of the Gratitude Award, and then watch for that. And then as a prize in the award, you'll get a nice plaque that says that you won the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award. And you'll also get a free account on mypodcastreviews.com, where you can then continue to track all of your international podcast reviews. So it doesn't matter if someone leaves a review for you in the United States or in Argentina or Zimbabwe or anywhere like that. We'll be tracking all of these, and we'll let you know then who the winner is. We'll have the award later on after the special voting process is done. So you can go to internationalpodcastday.com to find more details about that. Steve, what was the inspiration for this award?
We have a couple different awards programs that are available for podcasting. And regardless of how you feel about the criteria and counts and listenerships and criteria in terms of websites, or whether it's Stitcher from the Academy based on independent voting or anything like that, I felt it was very important because of what we do with International Podcast Day, that we provided something that I feel is very important through podcasting, or otherwise we wouldn't be listening to them, and that's how they impact you. We know of people that have recovered from alcoholism because of a podcast, or a broken marriage, or infidelity, or perhaps the ramen noodle that made you laugh so hard you forgot about your horrible day, right?
Yeah.
That's important criteria. And the second half of that, besides honoring to that, is to assist in encouraging in reviewing. You know, we all need a little prick sometimes to make us do something. So we are applying that prick to you. And I think there's a lot of value in the reciprocal of that. And that is, you honestly get to get honest feedback from your listeners and how they have been impacted.
So even if you don't win, you still win.
You still win. See? So there's no losers in this. And that's what I love about it.
Yeah, one person gets that actual plaque as the award, but then everyone else, you've got that opportunity to get more reviews. So get your audience moving. Call on the troops and ask them. There are things we're going to be filtering out, review exchanges and stuff like that, looking for illegitimate stuff. We're really looking for your audience to review your show. And so you need to submit your podcast over at internationalpodcastday.com and the gratitude awards section over there. And not the podcast you listen to, but submit your podcast and then get your audience to start voting for you by writing reviews for you in iTunes or Stitcher. And the way we've worked out this algorithm is truly, it is not a numbers game. Now, the more reviews you get, yes, the more that helps you. But if you get 10 reviews and you have a small podcast and some other podcast gets 100 reviews, but they have a really, really big podcast, you could still win instead, because of the way that we've designed this algorithm to really be about measuring how grateful your audience is for your podcast. So we've got more details about that over at internationalpodcastday.com. And you can join at any time, but the earlier you join, the better. And you can use your email list, Twitter, mention it in your podcast. The main thing is ask your community to express why they listen to your podcast, how your podcast has impacted them through those iTunes and Stitcher reviews. And then you have that opportunity to win the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award. And if nothing else, you get those awesome podcast reviews. Steve, on September 30th, it's more than what we do on our own and the events that we host somewhere out there beneath the pale moonlight and all of these things that we might be doing to celebrate International Podcast Day. But there will be a lot of official activities. I know we're still working on the schedule, but what are some of the things that we have lined up on September 30th?
Yeah, you're not kidding. My hands are full with this one. One of the things we're doing with International Podcast Day, Daniel, is we're going to go around the world for International Podcast Day. And how it works out, because International Podcast Day, September 30, actually starts in Australia for us and continues to go around the globe. So what we're doing is we're bringing in a few podcasters from various locales around the world, and they're actually going to do a stream from their foreign land and potentially in their own foreign tongue, which I think is really going to be interesting and actually shows the proof of the internationalism of what we're doing. So we're going to start in Australia, and the official streams, which we'll have documented on the site here pretty soon, are almost in the hands of that broadcaster in terms of what they wanted to do. based on some guideline. And I think a lot of it is going to be talking about podcasting, potentially having, call-ins, but more precisely an outreach into perhaps a lot of areas of the world that have never heard about it. So, for example, on one of the streams, I'm bringing in my very good best friend from Africa, who is the CIO of Airtel Africa. And, for example, I'm going to talk to him about communications and podcasting and that stuff that's going on currently in Southern Africa. And I think that'll be really cool. So as we continue to go around the world, we've already got some countries identified. Then we're going to come back across Canada, the U.S., and finally end up in Hawaii. We're going to have the closing event, which Todd Cochran is going to do for us. So although I don't have a complete schedule and itemized list of what's going on yet, it's really going to be cool. So it ends up for us that are actually producing this, not 24 hours, but like 30 hours in total.
Yeah, we've got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm shifting around my schedule because that would normally be the day that I would prepare and record my Once Upon a Time podcast with the TV show coming back. I'll still be recording on that night, but I'll be shifting my preparation schedule around so that I'll have plenty of time to participate in things throughout the day and join those conversations and start conversations about podcasting on that same day. So please go to internationalpodcastday.com and discover all of the ways that you can celebrate with us, that you can give back to the podcast you enjoy, that you can help grow the podcasting industry, what you can do as a podcaster to celebrate this day, how you can enter your podcast in the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award. You can learn more about International Podcast Day, get those banners, those audio and video promos that you can use on your own site and your own shows, and see the schedule for the live events. And make sure you use that official hashtag with anything you're posting on social media. It's hashtag podcast day. If you want to follow the conversation on that day, I really recommend that you use either tchat.io or tweetchat.com. That makes it really easy to participate in the conversation, see the live stream of tweets that are going out with that hashtag podcast day in it, as well as join the conversation and have that hashtag automatically added to your tweets. So that's tchat.io or tweetchat.com, and log in with your Twitter account there to participate in that conversation. Steve, thank you very much for joining me with this. And where can people then follow your shows and connect with your content?
Oh, well, thank you for that opportunity. A lot of people know me from netcaststudio.com, but here about 6 months ago, we rebranded to Modern Life Podcast Network. So you can find everything we have at modernlifepodcastnetwork.com. And thank you so much, Daniel, for this opportunity, and looking forward to working with you the rest of the month.
You're welcome. And thank you, Steve. And thank you for putting this together. I know that many people have probably been interested in having an International Podcast Day, since we have International Everything Else Day, even International Talk Like a Pirate Day. But I think this has the potential to really improve people's lives a lot more than Talk Like a Pirate Day. So thank you, Steve, for everything that you are doing to make this a reality.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So make sure that you connect with Steve and his great podcast over at modernlifepodcastnetwork.com. I'm really excited about International Podcast Day and everything that will be going on with it, and the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award that I'm heading up with my podcast reviews as the sponsor for that. And I'm excited for celebrating podcasting again. It's a great day, great enthusiasm, great energy. So go to internationalpodcastday.com to find out how you can participate and start that conversation in podcasting. Speaking of conversations, I am having a bunch of really good conversations, and other great conversations are happening inside of Podcasters Society. If you didn't hear last episode, Podcasters Society is an exclusive community of podcasters together focused on improving our podcast, growing our shows from average to amazing through improving our content, presentation, production, promotion, even monetization, but that's not required, and much more. We do this through one-on-one conversations, some group conversations, forums, live chat, webinars. On September 24th, even if you're not a member of Podcaster Society, you can join us for a live free webinar with Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl, as we talk about how she grew Grammar Girl to be a very successful podcast and what success means to her in podcasting and what podcasting has enabled her to do. And also to learn more about how she failed the first time that she tried to do a podcast, or not necessarily failed, but it just didn't go well. Podcaster Society is all about helping you grow your podcast from average to amazing. So please check that out over at podcastersociety.com. Charter membership is open through September 10th. After that, it will close down for a while. You'll have an opportunity when we do that free webinar to join, but it will be a very, very small window. But we really want to focus on growing some great value, and already there is great value inside of that community. That's at podcastersociety.com. I'd love to work with you to help you podcast, and Podcaster Society is one way that I do that. I also have things like mypodcastreviews.com and subscribeandfollow.com, a WordPress plugin that helps you get those subscriptions for your podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Android, Blueberry, SpeakPipe, and all kinds of platforms and tools. Check it out at subscribeandfollow.com. But if you have a question or anything that you would like me to cover in a future episode of the Audacity to Podcast, then please contact me through the website at theaudacitytopodcast.com. But remember, most of all, that I want you to learn from this episode is to start that conversation about podcasting and celebrate International Podcast Day on September 30th. So go to internationalpodcastday.com for more information about that. Now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions, finding success, and starting that conversation. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com. Thank you for listening. The Audacity to Podcast is a proud member of Noodle Mix Network. Find more of our award-winning and award-nominated podcasts to make you think, laugh, and succeed at noodle.mx.